This is Roy Hallums, and he'd been captured from Baghdad in broad daylight nearly 11 months earlier. Now, with dust still hanging in the air and helicopter engines rumbling outside, an elite team of Delta Force operators believed they'd finally found Roy in the middle of nowhere, hidden in a secret chamber below a rural compound. But the mission was a huge risk. It was in the heart of the so-called Sunni Triangle, which was a hotbed of militant activity. Additionally, the intel they had from their informant was unreliable, and even if true, no one could confirm if Roy was still even alive. But they had to try. As the Delta operators came to the living room, they noticed there was a shallow rug in the corner that looked out of place. One of the operators gave a quick signal, another knelt down, flipped the rug, and saw what intelligence had suggested: a concealed hatch. The moment they pried it open, they were met with musty, hot air. They dropped down into a dark hole barely 5 feet deep. Inside, curled up in the dirt, was a bearded man who hadn't seen sunlight in nearly a year. But was this really Roy Hallums? Roy Hallums wasn't a soldier, a spy, or a politician. He was a contractor, a retired Navy logistics officer turned civilian working to help keep the new Iraqi army fed. His position with the Saudi Arabian Trading and Construction Company in Iraq was supposed to be behind the lines, safe, stable, and routine. But Iraq in 2004 was anything but that. On November 1st, 2004, his life took a devastating turn when approximately 20 armed militants stormed the compound in Baghdad where he worked. During the attack, gunfire erupted, resulting in the loss of a security guard and one of the attackers. Hallums, along with 5 others, including Filipino accountant Roberto Tarongoy, were seized and forced into waiting vehicles. The kidnappers quickly released Dawari and the 3 Iraqis shortly after the initial abduction, but kept Hallums and Tarongoy captive. For Hallums, this was just the beginning of what would become a 311-day nightmare. For nearly 3 months following the kidnapping, Hallums' family and U.S. authorities had no confirmation of his condition or whereabouts. The silence was finally broken on January 25, 2005, when a disturbing video emerged, showing Roy begged for help while facing a weapon. In the 60-second video, a visibly nervous Roy made no specific demands but instead pleaded for help. Though he may not have felt it at the time, the U.S. military was trying like hell to get him back. It was just easier said than done. Then, roughly 7 months after his capture, the group released Roy's fellow detainee, supposedly after being paid a huge ransom. When Tarongoy debriefed the military on his captivity, he relayed the message that unless the Americans paid the group $12 million, he would be harmed. With a seemingly impossible ransom demand now, the U.S. was now on a timer, and they had no idea when it would run out. For months, American military and intelligence agencies conducted an extensive search for Roy, but numerous obstacles hampered their efforts. The region south of Baghdad, where intelligence suggested Hallums might be held, was vast and difficult to navigate, characterized by rural farmland with dirt pathways cutting between fields. The area's sparse population and remoteness provided ideal cover for kidnappers. Intelligence gathering proved exceptionally difficult in this environment. Special operations planners had to consider countless potential hideouts spread across miles of territory without specific location information. Each potential lead required careful verification before committing resources to what could be a dangerous and fruitless operation. The nature of the kidnappers themselves further complicated the search. Unlike more high-profile militant organizations that often publicize their hostages, Hallums' captors maintained an unusually low profile. They appeared to be a family-based criminal enterprise rather than a major militant group. Over time, U.S. intelligence confirmed that the group holding Roy was not a militant group, but rather a family-run criminal gang that was using the chaos of the war to make a quick buck. Intercepted telephone communications indicated there was extreme secrecy surrounding Hallums' confinement. Unlike hostages who might be moved between locations or occasionally spotted, Hallums was kept in an underground bunker specially constructed to avoid detection. For most of his captivity, he was blindfolded, his hands and feet bound and confined to this hidden underground cell. So although they knew he was being held underground somewhere, they had no idea where until they got a lucky breakthrough. During a sweep of a militant-infested neighborhood south of Baghdad, U.S. soldiers captured a man believed to be a militant. Under interrogation, he confirmed that he had ties to militant groups, but had crucial information about an American hostage he would exchange for leniency. Skeptical, the Americans decided to hear him out. According to the guard, he had been one of several men who watched over Roy during his confinement. The guard said he was being held at a farmhouse south of Baghdad and gave the exact location. When comparing this information to what Tarongoy had said, it matched up. He had told the Americans that they had been kept at a farm during his time there. He knew that from the sounds and smells that surrounded them. And although the US wanted to rejoice that they had finally gotten actionable intelligence on Roy, there was just one problem. During the interview, the guard said his captors were either going to move him to a new location or worse, take his life in the coming days. This was their last chance to get Roy. Though it would be dangerous and going in virtually blind, the US military knew this was their only chance to save Roy's life. What happened next? We can't show it all here, not without YouTube slapping this video with a warning, but we can show you on Patreon. To watch the full-length video completely uncensored, subscribe to my Patreon page, where there are no restrictions on what we can tell and show you there. Scan the code or use the link in the description now to watch the full video now. Just after 5:30 a.m., several Little Bird helicopters took off from an army base in Baghdad. The plan was relatively simple but fraught with danger and hinged upon a lot of luck. As the roughly 12-man Delta Force team landed at the farmhouse, several platoons of Army Rangers would come in via a vehicle convoy and create a perimeter to isolate the farmhouse from any enemy reinforcements. However, if the Rangers ran into any problems on the way there, the Delta operators could be left high and dry. Worse, the hostile actors could have rigged the compound to blow in this exact case, and as soon as the Delta operators entered, they could be blown apart. But they had to take the risk, since they had to know there were consequences to capturing Americans. After roughly a 20-minute flight, 3 helicopters thundered in low over the Iraqi farmland. The Delta operators received confirmation that the Rangers had set up the perimeter. The rescue was a go. Dust spiraled off the ground as the Delta team jumped off the helicopters just as their skids touched the ground. The MH-6 Little Birds flared just yards from the gate, blades kicking up dust as the team leapt out, boots hitting dirt before the skids even settled. Within seconds, the lead assaulter had already rigged an explosive charge to the locked fence and forced it open. To ensure the enemy did not have time to react, the Delta operators swarmed the compound in a rushed but methodical manner. They knew the people here were some pretty dangerous individuals. If any of them so much as moved a finger in their direction, it would be the last mistake they ever made. Once inside the compound, the main assault team split into 2 fire teams. One moved to breach the front door, while the second peeled around to the rear to cut off any escape and search the backyard. Intelligence had suggested there would be at least 2 armed men, as well as hidden dangers ready to blow. To prevent this from happening, they had to move fast. After forcing entry via a 2-pound linear charge on the front gate, the team discovered the farmhouse had just one main hallway that branches into 3 rooms. Each operator moved silently, cradling suppressed HK-416s with suppressors, weapons tuned for close quarters and deadly precision. Even their sidearms, Glock 19s fitted with wet cans, were configured for silence. Even in daylight, sound discipline would throw the enemy off track on where they were should they have to engage. On the right-hand side was a kitchen and a bedroom. At the end of the hallway was a living room with a door that led to the backyard. Although to the operators it may have seemed like an eternity, within a matter of seconds the team had already cleared the house, but they did not find anyone. Despite calling out for him, there was no response. Had they moved him? Or had their worst fears been realized? They would soon find out. The second team entered from the backyard and cleared their zone. Outside they found 2 guards who had dropped their weapons and were more than happy to surrender to the Americans. But there was no Roy. Inside, the first team had already cleared the kitchen and a small sleeping area. No hostiles, no movement, but again, no sign of Roy. But that's when one of the team members paused. A corner rug didn't sit right. It was too flat, too clean. He stepped closer, nudged it aside, and saw a faint wood rectangle buried in the floor. A concealed hatch. This had to be it. The Delta operators immediately attacked the door in a wild frenzy to get it open. One operator was soon able to pop the latch with a crowbar. The air that escaped was stale and hot, with flashlights flicked on and rifles at the ready, prepared for any surprises. Thankfully, there was not a radical militant down there, but something much worse. What they saw wasn't a room. It was a hole in the earth about 5 feet deep and the size of a large closet. And in that hole, barely blinking, sat a man with a beard down to his chest and eyes that hadn't adjusted to light in months. The first Delta operator cried out, "Are you Roy?" With barely any energy left, the man was able to squeak out a faint, "Yes." They had finally found Roy Hallums. The operator dropped in and made contact. Roy flinched, dazed, unsure if what he was seeing was real. They told him he was safe, that they were here to get him out, that it was over. Operators extracted Roy from the hole carefully. He was weak, malnourished, eyes flicking between the operators, and soon they had him bundled in a blanket and on his way to a waiting helicopter. Although Roy was still on his own 2 feet, after a 311-day nightmare, they had no idea his exact physical state, and getting him to an emergency room was of the utmost importance. The other operators swept the outbuildings as the first team moved Roy back to the extraction point. In one of the sheds, they found evidence of previous captives, restraints and related equipment. Not proof of who or what had been there, but enough to know this place had been used more than once. In another corner of the main house, they found a satellite phone. Logs showed calls placed to an unknown number in Syria. The intel team would work on that later, but for now they were focused on getting out of the area fast, since rangers on the perimeter radioed back that a growing crowd was forming, trying to gawk at what was going on. They handed him an American flag and loaded him onto a helicopter. The bird lifted off as the farmhouse shrank into the haze, and Roy realized that his ordeal was finally over. He was free. But for the team, there was no time to celebrate. Just another silent flight into the dawn. Another day in Delta. Bye for now.